Yo, what's shaking? Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum. That's Anwar Richardson. We're talking Arch Manning. I don't think we've done that yet this week. So Anwar and I are doing our weekly Arch Manning video because we like to pay our bills and we like to have the lights turned on in our house, and nothing moves the needle right now quite like Arch Manning. Do us a solid, like the video, subscribe to the channel, get notifications. I literally just saw us add a new subscriber in the corner of my eye as I was saying this. It always warms my heart when that happens. Every time Orange Bloods gets a new subscriber on YouTube, an angel gets its wings. Onward. Oh, and leave comments in the comments section. How dare I forget to say that. Onward. Interesting stuff on Arch Manning over on orangebloods.com that you've been able to report. A lot of it, I think most interesting is the concept and idea. And by the way, go to orangebloods.com to read the full Arch Manning update. I think the big focus in this conversation piece is the timeline that Arch Manning is likely going to adopt going into the finale, his decision for the 2023 recruiting class. Interesting that it's the opposite of what I think I would have expected, which is guys like him don't like to have distractions as seniors. It helps from a momentum standpoint to have a quarterback in place of the college that you're going to pick. And I think it's very interesting that per your reporting, Manning will likely take a much more cautious and slower approach towards making a decision, in large part because the college football world of the last even 4 months have been so volatile, and we've seen so many shakeups and coaches moving and everything that's happened, players transferring, that it's created a landscape where if the Mannings want to make a decision they can totally feel great about, maybe that can only happen if it happens later rather than sooner.
Yeah, Catch. I think, typically, and one of the things that I was, reporting on orangebloods.com on our war room, which is our insider piece that, like you said, feel free to catch that, right now. Typically, Catch, though, historically, you've done recruiting for, 20, 30 years. The quarterbacks usually are the guys that recruit, that commit early, and then they kind of end up being the Pied Pipers of the recruiting class. And one of the things I outlined when I went back and looked, I just looked at the majority of guys that Texas has had over the past few years that have committed. Catch, I don't think there's a single person that Texas has had that's committed past July. The majority of them are, before football season. A lot of guys doing in February, like Malik Murphy. He was a February 13th commitment, heading into it. Sam Ehlinger committed a year earlier than he had to. So you see that happen often. And what this thing has changed, Catch, and what we're seeing now is a lot of movement by coaches right after the season. And I think one of the big things, and what I was able to discern, is that the Lincoln Riley effect, I don't think people understood what the ripple effect might be. And people just thought, oh, it affected, Oklahoma, it affects USC, and that's it. But what it seems like from the Manning perspective, Catch, is that they're saying, like, wait a second. So you're telling me a guy who was firmly entrenched in the program, who had everything rolling, who's putting out Heisman Trophy winner after Heisman Trophy winner, they're competing for Big 12 titles at all times, that he suddenly just left, like unexpectedly just left. There was no hot seat, Catch. There was nothing to that effect. Just decided that he wants to go to another program. We saw the same thing with Kelly leaving from Notre Dame, going to LSU. And so what it seems like after that, and and there may be others that do the same, Catch. And now the Manning family is saying, okay, hold on. What you might commit to in February, March, or June, it may look totally different, Catch, when December rolls around and the season's ended, and all of a sudden you're committed to a thing. And again, you look at a case with Malik Murphy, and again, a coach didn't leave. Malik committed to a program in February And the weekend before the dead period, Quinn Ewers shows up, and there's nothing he can do at that point. So, and so I think, and while it's different, I'm just saying this is what happens when the danger of committing early, and that's what it looks like. They're going to maybe wait their time, wait until the fall, and decide then when they feel like they know the teams are stable and the coaching situation is stable, then they'll do it then. But the thought of what we thought was going to happen as far as the early commitment seems to be off the table as of right now.
Yeah. And, the more I've had a chance to process it all, the more it really makes a lot of sense. In part, if you look at the schools that Arch Manning has a real keen interest in, Texas is the obvious one, which is, boy, right now, Steve Sarkisian looks pretty sexy, but God, if they're anywhere near 5-7, 6-6, 7-5, and it feels like an immediate hot seat, now you know that, versus not really. You give a commitment now, you might feel quite different about what Texas looks like as a situation come decision-making time towards the end of next year. Alabama, I mean, the whispers of Nick Saban retiring are going to exist, I think consistently for a while. And when Saban announces his retirement, he's not going to do one of these after signing day things. Like, that potentially gets to be pretty risky, because most schools these days just let guys out of their NIL, not their NILs, but their letter of intents if a coach leaves, because it feels like you're trapping kids. So when Saban eventually makes a decision, it might be at the end of a regular season, in between a bowl game. And you know what I mean? Like Mississippi, again, another program, I think similar to Texas, where you don't want to go in if it looks like the kitchen for any reason might be hot, if there's any instability issues at all. The most stable school in all of this is Georgia. That's one of the schools he's taken a long look at. I don't think any of this applies to Georgia, because Kirby Smart is good. He's a Georgia guy.
Yeah.
But you can make a case that all of the other schools that Arch is taking a look at are schools that, it might not be a terribly bad idea to keep a side eye on all of them going into this season, just to make sure there's no buyer's remorse almost as soon as you finish buying.
Yes, and we've seen it. I mean, Ketch, we've seen, like, in these instances, let's say he wants to go to Texas, right? And that seems to be, the thing. Let's say he decided to commit some, prior to the season. Let's just say Texas just doesn't get off to the best start. Let's just, we can put that on the table. I mean, look, you're going to have a young quarterback that's going in there, potentially some young offensive line pieces, a defense that, still needs some improvement. So let's say that they get off to 2-3, for instance, or maybe it goes even worse than that. And you're locked into this. And now all of a sudden there's whispers of Sarkisian, and what does that look like going forward? And is he in a hot seat, or is he not in a hot seat? What do you do, if you're in there? To your point, if you're Bama and you're there with Saban, and then all of a sudden he decides that, I'm done with this for whatever reasons. And again, these are just hypothetical things. Maybe we might be saying the same thing about Nick Saban for the next 10 to 15 years, for all we know, but it does behoove them when it does make sense, Ketch, for them to say, all right, we can wait. We can afford to wait. See, the thing is, Ketch, what often happens, and this to be 100% true, you can lean on guys who aren't 5 stars and tell them, hey, man, look, if you don't commit, pretty soon, like we've offered it to, 2 other guys, and we're going to take the first guy that commits. They could do that with Arch, right? Is that fair to say, Ketch? You ain't going to try to lean on that guy like that?
Not even a little bit. And Texas is willing to take the risk of kind of having no quarterback plays. Like, I think even Georgia's offered another quarterback. It doesn't mean that Georgia isn't making Arch their number one target, but it also means they don't feel like they have such terrible, they feel like our leverage is returning national champions is such that you'll forgive us if we get our ducks in a row in the event that we don't get Arch. Yet the race to get Arch could really turn into a big game of chicken. Because if you're Texas and you take that we're not offering anybody but Arch approach until he decides, you just, at that point, you may be announcing we're not taking a quarterback in the 2023 recruiting class, barring something really falling into our laps. Because if he doesn't make his decision until let's say end of October, and it sounds like that could be too soon. I mean, he might take it longer than that. It doesn't leave you a lot of time to work a backup plan, especially since until we see it completely change, the quarterback market typically is the first thing that takes care of itself in a recruiting year. Arch may be one of the only quarterbacks that are holding out. And if you're Georgia, if you're Ole Miss, if you're Alabama, if you're Texas, you're LSU, waiting on Arch and not doing anything else basically puts you in a worst case scenario should you miss out on Arch. And I wonder how many schools have the stomach for that. I wonder if you're one of these schools that wants to get Arch, if you take a place sitter, knowing that either that kid can just leave if we get Arch, bye, or Arch has to be comfortable that it's a 2 quarterback class, but one of the guys isn't, a high profile national prospect like he is. All of these schools have to walk a really delicate path with a quarterback that's waiting later in the year to make a decision. How you treat that, how you allow yourself to either have a backup plan or not, will be, I think, really fascinating in the months to come if you're Texas, because it's easy to kind of do this Arch or bust mentality 11 months before signing day. It's another thing to be doing it 45 days before signing day. And who knows, it might not be that big of a deal. I mean, Malik Murphy could be in a position where he redshirts this year and you could spread your quarterbacks out a little bit in a way where it's not drastically damaging, but it's not ideal. And it is the thing that Texas has got to figure out. What do we do if we don't get Arch? And I think that's a question every school has to ask themselves. And the circumstances of this are maybe going to make some schools feel a little queasier than others.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the game of chicken, Texas could afford to play it, Paul, because they do have Quinn Ewers around. And so if you want to play that game and you want to say, all right, we'll wait and hold off on something, Sarkisian may be able to do what he did before. You remember when he told us about the offensive linemen? I've got guys who are willing to commit at any point, but I'm holding out. He might do the same thing with the quarterbacks and say, look, I've got some guys who want to come here.
And he may be right.
Right. And he might say, but I'm holding out for Quinn. And then when I'm ready, he did that and he did it successfully. And at the time when he said it to us, Ketcher, are you sure? Are you sure you got a bunch of offensive linemen that you can get? You should probably take what you should get right now and not play this game. But he played it really close to the vet and played it tight. And it paid off for him. So maybe there is a payoff for him, Ketch, that he says, all right, I got some quarterbacks that I can take right now, but there's the big fish out there, and I'm a big game hunter. And he's like, I'm going to go for the big game. Arch is the big game, and I'm willing to wait and see. And look, Ketch, if you are Sark, wait and see if Arch is probably the best thing. Because you want to be able to show them hey, what you saw last year was one thing. Let me show you what we're doing this year, right? And there's probably there's a conversation in here that I want to get to. And so I'm going to put kind of a pinpoint in that too, because there's a question I want to ask. If this waiting for the season probably benefits Texas more than any other program. We know what Bama is. Bama's not going to fall off. We know what Georgia is for the most part. Georgia's not going to fall off. The only team that can really improve their stock is Texas. Probably because the stock is low, but that's the one stock that, hey, you give them some time and go into the season, then it gets improved. Now, listen, because here's one question I want to ask you, because you had a conversation on Twitter this week that I thought was interesting. You talked about like signature wins, and I want to kind of parlay that into this conversation, and maybe gets cuts up into two different things. Tariq, I forget his last name, is one of the guys that he mentioned this. So you talked about Sarkisian needing a signature win and how important that was, and then how OU would be a signature win. Some people question you on that, but knowing what you know now, and knowing that, hey, they're going to wait until the fall. Texas opens up, they play 5 games before OU. They play Louisiana Monroe, Bama, UTSA, Texas Tech, and then West Virginia. And then they play OU at that point. When you start thinking about it, Ketch, and what that signature win would look like, what do you think the record of Texas needs to be idealistically heading into that OU weekend? As relates to Arch.
You know, my instincts tell me they're two different things. That a win over Oklahoma in general is exactly what the program needs. I wonder, it's one thing to announce your decision whenever you want to announce it at as late of a date as you want to, because you want to be careful and you want to be absolutely sure that when you give it, there's no chance that it changes. I think starting fast for Arch, not for Arch, but just as a program, like Texas is, of all the schools that he's looking at right now, Texas is the riskiest. It went 5-7 last year. And, if Alabama goes 5-7, Nick Saban can say that's an anomaly. And you can take me to the bank that we're going to win. And I think you could probably do that with Kirby Smart now. And you could probably do that with a number of coaches. Steve Sarkisian's never had better than a 9-win season as a head coach. And he went 5-7 last year. And a sketchy year this year does put him on a hot seat, period. Texas fans can act like they'll be okay if they're pointing towards 2024 as the time when they can tell themselves whatever they need to go to sleep now. But Texas goes 7-5 next year, and Sark is 500 through 2 years. He's on the hot seat. He's got to win in year 3. He can't go. Steve Sarkisian can't go 5-7, 7-5, 8-4. He will lose his job. I mean, that is considerably worse than what the expectations would have been for Tom Herman over the same 3 years. And so I think it's imperative pre-OU, Texas has to look like, I don't know, like a program that's taking real steps. And that means that game against Alabama can't be an embarrassment. It means handle your business against Louisiana Monroe, be really competitive against Alabama, handle your business in these other games that you should win. And I think that if that's happening, based on what we know of the Mannings, that puts Texas in a really good position. To the extent, if you're doing all of that, individually 60 minutes of football against Oklahoma doesn't matter a ton with his specific decision. I think what Texas can, and the reason why I had real reservations about Texas being able to get Arch is I've assumed that Arch would announce early. And if you're trying to get Arch early, if you're Texas, how do you convince him you're not risky when you just went 5-7? So I think really pre-Oklahoma next year, because they're doing good if they blast Oklahoma, but they're 3-2 going into that game. And, it's just, you know how it is. It's one of those Texas seasons where week to week, the conversations about what's wrong. And I think that they've got to avoid that. They have to come out in September and look like a program that is taking real steps of progress forward, even if the record doesn't show. You can lose to Alabama, but don't look like you're light years away from Alabama in the process. So I think you're 100% right about this delay is super pro Texas, but it's revealing to Texas about the footing that it holds, that they require, I think, a checkout period. And you better be good in this evaluation period where they're trying to say, are we absolutely sure we want to go to Texas? It can't look like you are light years away from being a really good team. You got to be a pretty good team. And so that's what didn't get done last year. And I think that's what has to get done fairly early. I will be worried about the recruitment of Arch Manning for Texas. If Texas starts the year 3-2 next year going into Oklahoma, and generally speaking, they just don't look like a team that's taking.
I mean, and here's the thing, Catch, too. When you start looking at that first five, for whatever reason, all these games are at home. I mean, Louisiana Monroe's at home, Bama's at home, UTSA is at home. They're at Tech, then they're back home versus West Virginia before the neutral site. So you're talking 4 of your first 5 are at DKR. Like, you
should be 4-1.
Yes, right. I mean, I think everyone will give you the mulligan versus Bama, and if you pull it off, congratulations. But no one's going to look at you and say, damn it, man, you screwed up because you didn't beat Bama. But everything else, I mean, first of all, you should be 2-1 definitely coming out. You can't afford to slip up versus UTSA. Slip up versus UTSA.
Can't even entertain that thought. That cannot happen.
Correct. You get cancel Christmas at that point. You go against Tech, and you visit Tech, and that's probably going to be a little hostile, especially for Quinn, going back there. We know how Tech fans deal with people who they feel like did them wrong, right?
That game will be a live wire, but you have to win.
Yes. And then, the West Virginia game back here, you've got to win before going to OU. But yeah, as they're sitting there and they're monitoring, because Bama's going to continue to check the boxes. Georgia's going to continue to check the boxes. Everybody, it's going to be self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh yeah, that's what they do. Okay, that's what Georgia, that's what they do. Texas is the only one. And that's why I think Texas is in a good position to get Arch, because they know everybody's, for the most part, body of work outside of seeing, like, does Nick Saban retire? Does Kirby Smart go to the NFL? Something crazy like that, right? Outside of that, assuming none of, all those things are the same, they know what they're dealing with. They know what they're getting into. Texas is the only wild card. But if Texas comes out and play and looks strong, and to your point, if they're 4-1 heading into that OU weekend with the possibility of finishing 5-1, then I think you tell that family, okay, Steve Sarkisian is going to be here. Don't have to worry about any kind of hot seat. You're good going forward as far as saying this is where we're going to be. But if there's any kind of slip-ups, if there are any kind of hiccups, if it starts looking at anything like it did last year, then I think you lose the guy, and you lose that family, because they'll know, okay, we don't know what the future holds here for Sarkisian in the next year or two. It's just not worth it. So I think more so than ever, we talk about Texas needing a fast start. There ever was a year, Catch, that they need a fast start. They did it. By the way, guys, I'm just going to give you a prelude. I know Ketch is going to write about this in his 10 thoughts for the weekend. So if you're not on Orange Bloods, you need to see it, because I know my man's going to break it down on the way on Sunday. That's going to be worth the read.
You maybe, as you said that, I'm like, there's a part of me that has no idea what he's going to write. And there's another part of me that was like, man, last Sunday, I really didn't know what I was going to write until I read Anwar's column. Maybe he's right. Maybe my Sunday column is writing itself and I don't even know it.
It is.
I think
You just had four thoughts right here.
My spidey senses tell me this is what Texas has to avoid, okay? Because the schedule to me looks like they should be 4-1. But there's 4-1, and then there's shaky 4-1. What Texas can't avoid, look really good against Monroe in the opener, right? That just enhances expectations because you just kick the crap out of a team you should kick the crap out of. But then you play Alabama, and I'm not going to do one of these like they score 50, like I'm not even saying like 52-17. But Alabama can do like a 21-0 game against you where they're suffocating you and they're slowly killing you. And at halftime, it feels helpless. Texas has to avoid the "it felt helpless" against Alabama game. And then when they go into UTSA, they have to avoid they get walloped by Alabama, which is on the table. Like that can happen. And then UTSA comes in, and let's say that's a game that Texas wins. But UTSA will come in, and that will be their Super Bowl. Yeah. They'll be playing that game directly after Texas plays Alabama, and there's nothing you can say that's going to make them get up for the UTSA the way they did against Alabama. So what you have to avoid if you're Texas is being 2-1 after UTSA, but it include a butt kicking and too close of a game against UTSA. It can't like feel like you survived UTSA. You can't have people walking out of that game saying, man, I think they play that game 10 times. UTSA wins it 4. Like, you know, to get an Arch Manning when he's got options, you know, I think that you have to be better than that. And so it's not asking for a lot if you're Steve Sarkisian and the Longhorns, that through 3 games, the first 3 games of the season, they don't get embarrassed by Alabama. They don't let UTSA even remotely embarrass them. They do those 2 things, they get Arch Manning. That is easier said than done because I can close my eyes and see both of those things that they need to avoid occurring, especially with a team that just went 5-7. Who are we giving the benefit of the doubt that they won't? UTSA was better than them this year, at least in terms of week in and week out. They were a pretty good football team. Texas was not. So who are we to say, well, they should just show up and outclass UTSA and not have UTSA put a fourth quarter scare into them? You know, there's some proving that has to occur, but don't get embarrassed by Alabama and just handle your business solidly against UTSA. That, I think, gets you Arch Manning. I don't know if at that point that means you're a good team, but you're probably doing enough. And, you know, I think Texas is reaching a stage with Arch Manning where we're going to remember his recruitment for whether or not Texas vomits on itself in the 12th hour. Because they're in really good shape, and Arch has set this thing up for Texas to get it done. He's giving them time. And at the end of this, if he doesn't pick Texas, it really feels like in February of 2022, 6, 7, 8, 9 months out, that if they don't get Arch, that's the story. You don't even have to tell us what the record is. We know what happened.
Yeah, we know it is not going good. And we know that they don't believe in the future of Texas at that point, because like to your point, they're giving them every opportunity to show them every opportunity to. They visited campus twice. They saw a loss versus Oklahoma State. They witnessed everything else, and they're still saying, well, let's see what happens in the fall. I mean, you know, that's taking somebody back. Like that's taking your girlfriend back after she disappoints you, right? You guys, it's like, I'll give you another chance, girl. That's showing like I still want to be with you. Like I've got other options. I can get on Bumble right now. I can get on Tinder right now. I can make it happen. But you know what? I'm willing to see it and let this thing ride out. And so at that point, so if the pressure is on, Sarkisian, because what the two things that he can't have happen, Catch, that'll be you can't have Texas struggling with your 5-star quarterback and then lose Arch also. Like it's even though we'll know Quinn will probably be good and it'd be set going forward, like it's kind of like that like domino effect where you're like, ooh, ouch, like, man, that what becomes your consolation prize at that point. So I'm 100% with you. If Arch doesn't come, it's because they didn't see what they wanted to see in this upcoming season. And then it's just, we're making a whole bunch of different videos or for different subjects, and none of them are going to be positive if that's the case.
It's pretty simple. And real quick, last thing I'll say, and we'll wrap up. It is, as someone who interviewed Eli Manning, when Eli Manning I interviewed Eli Manning on the DKR turf, which would have been grass at the time, when he took his official visit with his dad back in the 1998 season. Eli wanted to come to Texas. And Eli didn't come to Texas, mostly because Chris Sims did. And then there was a world where Chris Sims was just thought to be a better prospect than Eli. Chris Sims was the Holy Grail. And when Archie and Phil Sims talked, they were able to outline okay, your kid wants to go to Texas. It makes sense. This is what's going to happen. But deep down, that Manning family has probably had a conversation before about just how close Eli, once upon a time, almost ended up at Texas. That Arch, all these years later, and look, it's not his kid, but it's another Manning in the legacy. The last one almost came to Texas. This Texas relationship with the Mannings is 25 years in the making. And that's different than the other schools involved in this. One of the weird little elephants in the room is that all of these schools are building something new with Texas or with Manning that would be a new chapter. This Texas Manning thing, they flirted with each other 25 years ago. And I think everybody knows it inside that family, how well thought of Texas is because of how close Eli once came to becoming a Longhorn. You think about it like that, and it really makes what's happening right now with Arch really interesting. Like the video, if you like the message that's in this, which is ultimately Anwar and are telling you Texas and Arch Manning, really good possibility. It's a matter of vomiting on yourself in September. And that's not that's a better position than any of these other schools are in, I think. If that message resonates, like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments in the comments section. If you think Anwar and I are just batshit crazy and we got it wrong, that's what the comment section is for. Until Monday, when we have the Monday Overreaction Show brought to you by Rogue Apothecary, therogueshop.com. You guys have a good weekend. Here's the Texas basketball continuing doing their thing. It always makes the offseason a little bit better when everybody's just not angry all the time. So go Texas basketball team. Have yourself a weekend, which would make for quite a week if you could pull off the rare KU Baylor double. But until Monday, for Anwar and myself, later.